Hello, and welcome to the virtual Comic-Con at Home Designing Your Tabletop Game panel. I'm Ross Thompson, your moderator, and I'm joined by a lovely panelists here to talk about game design, and they can introduce themselves, and we'll get going. Kathleen?
Oh, hi, I'm Kathleen Mercury. I'm a middle school teacher, and I've been teaching game design for about 13 years, and I've got a few titles in the pipe, and then I also am a podcaster on games in schools and libraries, board game broads, on-board games, and others.
Sen?
Hi, I'm Sen-Foong Lim. I'm a game designer and a psychology professor, and I have a podcast thingy as well, but it's actually a live cast on Facebook. It's called The Maple Syrup Show every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time.
Elisa?
Hi, I'm Elisa Teague. I am a tabletop game designer for cards and board games, role-playing games, and I'm also a puzzle designer. And I've been in the industry for 20 years and have quite a few games out, but we'll talk about those later.
Emerson?
Hi, my name is Emerson Matsuuchi. I'm also a tabletop game designer. I'm also a 3D modeler and programmer.
Eric?
I'm Eric Lang. I'm the game director at CMON, and like Elisa, I've been working in the game design business for about 20 years.
You did that on purpose, just to confuse people.
I suck at this. I will never get it right.
Or not, right?
I think you're just trying to fool people into thinking it's pronounced both ways. So
it's a tick at this point.
Oh, it's so funny. So right now we are having this virtual convention because we cannot meet in person. COVID-19 has shut down a lot of conventions, and they are being put on this virtual space. Game design as well, from our distributors having to be shut down and game stores closing. And there's a lot happening in our industry that is making it difficult to continue how we had been functioning. And how has that affected game design? Or how are we doing play tests? How are we designing our games? What kind of platforms are being used? Thoughts? Eric?
I knew he was going to pick me first. I mean, it's rough, right? So I think my experience is a little different from the rest of them here because right now I'm largely focused on the publishing side. I'm leading 2 teams of developers globally. So we've gained some efficiency in the sense that we're playtesting digitally now entirely, using mostly Tabletop Simulator, but we're also we're experimenting and looking out at some other things too. So we've gained in the data-driven playtest, like the late stage of playtest when you're just looking to balance stuff and need to grind through tons and tons of games. So we've actually gained quite a bit of efficiency there, but the early part of testing, the experience testing, where you need to be as close to one-way mirror in front of at the table, seeing the reactions and being part of the discussion, that has slowed to a crawl. And we are very slowly working our way back up to that. So we've basically moved our schedules around a little bit to crunch together as much late stage playtesting as we want and as we can. And because, I mean, we're a publisher that has a ton of stuff in the pipeline, that was actually fairly easy to do. As an individual, I'm sure it's a very different story. As an individual, for me, it's hard. I don't know, I'd love to hear what you guys think. For me, it's actually been kind of hard to get motivated on brand new designs.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to jump in and say that right now it's been so hard just because of everything that's going on in the world in general. It's been hard to stay creative. I feel like when you're looking at the world in pain, it's hard to stay motivated, as you said, but also it's hard to just get those creative juices flowing. As far as playtesting for my board game stuff, that's basically come to a standstill. I have playtesters that regularly come into my game room, and we go through rounds and rounds of playtesting. That has not been able to happen, obviously. And I have not gotten down the tabletop simulator versions of my designs yet. And I probably should learn how to do all of that. On my role-playing game design side, I'm able to do that through, Zoom and other chat functions. So I have been able to progress with a couple of the projects that I'm working on right now. And so at least that hasn't come to a standstill, but it's pretty hard when you can't have that face-to-face reaction on watching a group of people play together. Because usually I will just sit back and not even play and just watch people go through the rules and go through the components and see how everything works. And I sit there and I take notes. And I see when they have a question about something and how they work it out themselves, what I'm missing in my rule set, are they having fun? Can I see all the visual cues that, they need to be showing me as a designer? And I can't do that over Zoom where they don't have all of those components. They don't have, I can't watch all of their reactions, and I can't lead it, because if I lead it, I'm leading them. And so it's different.
I mean, for me, as a relatively new designer with only, a handful of finished games, on one hand, one game got signed and they're pushing it through the pipeline, like even coming out for Q1 next year, which I think in a normal sort of way seems fast. So, I mean, I'm excited.
Crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So,
in the good way. In the good way.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and it's a surprise too, but it's also showing a lot of confidence in, the publication and in the manufacturing and, all the different steps that come into play. So that was sort of a surprise there. But then this other game that I pitched out, and it's probably one of my better games. I had two publishers tell me that they wanted to sign it, but they just basically had to put a hold on everything until they kind of know what's happening moving forward. So, so there's that, so it's kind of like both ends of the spectrum. Yes, get them made, and no, we can't have that, can't take on the liability of the risk right now.
Emerson, are you actually like using all your programming and coding skills to like make like really cool things in Tabletop Simulator?
Actually, no. That's surprisingly, I haven't delved into Tabletop Simulator, but I have been re-educating myself on using Unity. So,
cool.
Of course you have. Did you learn a new language while you were at it?
No, but I was also trying to dabble in Unreal too. So I was trying to figure out which platforms I should really be focusing on in terms of some digital implementations, because I think with the environment right now, I've been more motivated to do things more on the digital end of things, especially since a lot of the designs I have that require playtesting have sort of, taken a hold, which I think is sort of the commonality that we're all facing at the moment. So.
For those of you who don't know, like Emerson's ridiculously smart. Like every time I see him at a convention, he's like, I've learned this brand new skill from scratch. Like,
yeah, it's like he downloads it like he's Johnny Mnemonic.
Oh no.
It's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome.
No.
For me, I think I'm kind of like Elisa, that I also am in the RPG field. So my next actual big project is going to be kickstarting right about when this drops. So middle of July. And that's basically what I'm focusing most of my time on right now, is the RPG stuff. So in the first few weeks of this whole lockdown situation, I wrote 2 new RPGs like from scratch, because it's easy in a way to do that. And then we could test it because people had nothing else to do except sit on Zoom and play, and we have like online dice rollers and things like that. It's a lot easier to do that than it was to get any of the new games off. But I also work as a developer freelance for a bunch of other companies. And so that has actually gone up in terms of a lot of companies, like Eric was saying, are switching their schedules around to say, oh, I guess we need to push this out the pipeline faster. And so they've turned their development wheel on and turned their acquisition wheel off. And that's where we get a lot of our business right now, is putting other games through their paces from a development perspective, especially games that can be easily played solo, or that really just need some look at the mathematics and the balance of it, where it doesn't take like full play tests. I have a whole family that will play test with me, and they do, and that's great. But sometimes you need more than that to really get into the nitty-gritty of it. But development is not so bad. RPGs are really good, and new game designs, however, are not so hot right now.
That's the common theme.
Yeah.
Can I just send in Elisa a question just real quick? Like, are you on your RPG stuff? Are you are you sort of ad hocing the playtest, or are you actually using a platform like Roll20 or something like that?
It depends.
I've been using, although I want to use Roll20 for right now because everything is on lockdown for sure. Like we're using chat rooms like this, like Zoom or the like, and I'm distributing the materials, and we're just running games, and we're like running through scenarios and seeing how things work. One of the projects that I'm on that I'm allowed to talk about, some of them I'm not allowed to. One of the projects that I'm on that I'm allowed to talk about is the Werewolf 5th edition book that I'm one of the authors for. And so right now we are in the lore writing stage of everything, and mechanics, but I'm working through the mechanics side of things with a small playtest group, and then the lore, all of the other authors are dividing that up and writing their own, tribes and things like that. And so, and then we're allowed to have meetings through, video chat and talk about feedback that we're giving each other on how everything's coming together. So that makes it very easy to do. With my other stuff, we're just running through game scenarios and playing. We're actually just playing right here like this. Some of it may just be theater of the mind stuff, but it's really the mechanics that we need to work out. And so we have everybody roll dice and hope that everybody's being honest in the name of a play test and the name of a game anyway. And it works out really well.
Yeah, for me, Roll20 isn't something that I need because most of the games that I write are theater of the mind, just like Elisa was saying. So I don't need a map and little miniatures to move around on it. I think I have some stuff here that I'll literally just hold up like a card and say, oh yeah, this is the current marching order that you're in, or something like that, right? So people get a picture of it and we all agree that that's the thing, or I'll draw it in Google Docs or something. It's really very minimal. The most important thing for us is a dice rolling system, just in case people aren't, up and up on their dicing. Right. But I play with friends a lot, so they really are. It's just to share it and see that, oh yeah, that's the roll you got. We use Discord an awful lot. Discord helps me to organize everything really nicely. So I can have the rules right there. They can link to the rules, the move set, different things. I'll just copy and paste whole charts in there that are like lookup tables. And then there's dedicated chat features. And I make a column or like a forum, a sub forum for every character, so that the people can populate it with their characters, pictures, all that kind of stuff. So it is a way of doing it. It's not perfect, but it's definitely not bad. Like I've actually done more role playing now because we can't get together than I do when we can get together. If that sounds like, it's just the way the world is right now, I guess.
Funny enough, it's true. You can really get a lot of people to want to play because they're sitting around doing nothing. And it's easier to, most of the people that I know are still not back at work. And so it's easy to get a schedule going where that is usually pretty difficult to manage without lots of doodle emails trying to figure out how, when everybody's available, right? So,
Well, and one thing for me, for like, from an education perspective, like this time has such an opportunity to really transform education in so many different ways, from what we're experiencing like socially and culturally, but also what we're experiencing from a technological perspective. I mean, I've got a game now on Tabletop Simulator. I now have used Discord other than just downloading the app, And so what I'm really excited about is seeing how the way that we're using technology, the way that we're viewing the world, the way the world is being expressed, and to see how the art that we create reflects those changes. And I mean, I'm certainly hopeful for education that there's a shift from the sort of traditional factory model, and that I'm hoping that distance learning and the other methods that we have to pursue in terms of how we teach kids, how we reach them where they are, I'm so hopeful that we see some fundamental changes there. We'll see. But also, in gaming, there's a lot of spaces that we can explore in terms of tabletop gaming, tabletop design, and that I'm really excited to see how people, look at this as a step forward, not just sort of like an oasis or a pause until we get back to normal.
Do you think there's going to be more like solo games coming out next year?
Yes. Yes.
I do, but I do feel I do, and I like it, but I hope that doesn't become, that doesn't feel like sort of intermission, right? We're at intermission, so we're going to make a bunch of solo games. I haven't, maybe you guys have, I have not seen a lot of like huge innovation in solo games. I just seen conversions.
Well, that's been from games that I have. I've been contacted to like make sure there's a solo gameplay mode. But that's the thing though too, if we make all these solo games, by the time they come out, everyone's going to be desperate to get together and to interact and not necessarily play solo games. So if you can push something out really quickly, print and play or something like that, awesome. But you know, we're looking at hopefully 6 months more, 8 months more, we'll see.
Well, and that's kind of one of the things that we'll see, right? I think right at the beginning, we had a lot of companies that were putting out print and play versions, like that were, this is great, we can hop on this really quick. And there were other ones that were, here's a solo play version for different conversions and stuff like that. But now we're at a point where we're in it for the long haul, you know, and now we're looking at how can we adjust and move. And I think one of the things we've kind of already talked about was there's a lot more people that are playtesting and the availability of how that is. Do you feel that with the access to, like, how anybody can hop on Discord, anybody can hop on Zoom, do you feel that game design and being a part of playtesting stuff has opened up the doors for a lot of people that wouldn't necessarily have been able to do that before?
Do you mean playtesting or design?
Design. Like, I because now we're not having to go to Gen Con, not having to have to go to Origin. Right. So pitching games and getting games in front of people that you're designing, is that?
Sorry, I interrupted somebody.
I think it's still more difficult to do it over in this type of format. You know, even having this panel is proving slight difficulties rather than just being in person. I definitely think that the accessibility that these types of programs give, and especially for playing games, because I didn't want to discount Roll20 or Tabletop Game Simulator or Board Game Arena, like all of these platforms are amazing for playing games, and they are great tools for play testing also and testing out things. But I personally still value everything, all the information that I get in person. And so, yes, if this is the way that it has to be for now, it's amazing that we have all of this technology to be able to do this. But would this be my preference? Probably not.
In terms of like new designers, let's say someone who wants to get into the industry, they want to design a game, they want to pitch the game to a publisher, it does seem like this is also a very difficult time for them to be able to submit games to publishers unless publishers have changed their policies in terms of how games get submitted to them, how they evaluate it, and so forth. So it does seem—
you're so right. Yeah. You're so right, actually. So this is actually, you hit on a big issue, right? It's how, so in theory, right, digital should have democratized access to publishers, right? In theory, because you don't have to spend money to go to cons and visit and see publishers anymore.
Yes.
But unfortunately, that democratization has actually led to a much lower signal to noise ratio, right? It's like, from the publisher side, I spend a lot of time going out and actively trying to seek talent outside of our normal, like out of our established pool. Yeah. Right. And that digital has made that easier. It's made it easier for me to connect to new talent, which is great. But on the other side, it's because there's so much talent out there, and when you don't know them, when you can't see them in person, all signals kind of come in at the same strength.
Yeah, we're very much a handshake kind of industry, right?
Yeah, so. And it's tough, right? Because you really, like, I've met so much in the last 4 months, I've met so many really talented people from crazy diverse backgrounds that like have nothing to do with our industry, with really new, fresh ways of thinking, which have energized me all over again.
Yeah, I just got contacted from Indonesia last night to do a print and play compendium with like 8 other designers to do a print and play thing, because they're like, oh.
Was that Ajit?
No, it was Angrad and Namos. Yeah, they know me from other things, but they're like, we're really wanting to do something, and it's hard to do it in Indonesia because we don't have any printing, but what if we did a print and play thing? I'm like, yeah, let's talk about that.
Right.
Yeah, so, sure.
Right. And I would say for friends of mine who are just starting to design games, getting pitches is really, really hard. And I've helped by connecting people with publishers that would be helpful to them. But because this is such a business of relationships, that if you're just sending an email with an amazing game and your sell sheet's great and your video's top notch, it's really hard to have that stand out in just a long line of submissions. And so, yeah, especially because, from gaming, playtesting and even pitching face to face, you can get a sense of, is this somebody you'd want to work with when you're working face to face or you're meeting face to face? And it's so hard to get a sense of that digitally. I'm excited and hopeful to see what will happen later, but definitely people who don't have as much of an industry advantage, I think it's hard for them unless they have somebody who's willing to help shepherd and guide them.
Mm-hmm. That's where mentorship comes in, right?
Actually, so I have a story actually of how I met Elisa. God, I think it was 15 years ago.
I think it was
when you were working with Playroom Entertainment. Like, this illustrates the point.
How much starts?
Playroom Entertainment was, is a publisher of many, many good family games, and I was desperate to get into family games. I had a lot of contacts in the fantasy flight space. I had almost none there. My point of contact was Dan Rowan, who was the CEO, and he's, as far as I assumed that it was a one-person company, right? Because at that time, all game companies were one-person companies, right? So when I met, now of course, without personal contact, I would have assumed that I was just writing to a one-person company. But then I met Elisa at, I want to say Gen Con South, like Anaheim or something like that.
I think it was when we had Gen Con SoCal.
Right. And I met,
that would have been 17 years ago.
2008, 2007.
And Elisa and Dan were sitting at the same table, but by sitting there at the table, it became clear to me immediately that Elisa was the one who was making the decisions about what to publish. I would not have known that if I hadn't seen them at the table.
Dan will never admit it, but it's true.
Oh, it's totally. I knew
awesome.
that in seconds, right? But it was that personal contact that made that, right? So if that's, like, how are new designers going to navigate that, right? How do they know because often the person that is front facing on a company is not actually the decision maker, right? It's hard.
And I will say that, as Kathleen was talking about, like, I do know that I have the industry advantage because I know so many people having been here for so long. But I will say that of all of the games that I have published, I would say the vast majority of them have come up, the deal has come up organically through hanging out and conversation and not formal pitches. And I know that sucks for new game designers. And that's why conventions and going to conventions is so important. And getting your name and face out there and just being a member of the community, of the game design community, is so important, because as you make these, bonds with everybody, you are just hanging out at a bar, or you are just playing their game and then talking about an idea that you have for another game and then saying, oh, that sounds really interesting. Tell me more. And that just happens so organically that you're not really getting in this situation. And I had something like that. Definitely can't talk about it now, but come out today in a chat room. So it is possible, because I am currently working on another project, and an idea came up, and I just said, oh, that sounds like something I've been wanting to do forever. And immediately they were like, as soon as when we're done with this, let's talk. And so it can happen, but it's not really happening through the I'm pitching you cold through an email situation. And that's pretty tough right now.
Right.
I do know that there's some publishers who may be setting up some like online pitch sessions, which is a good thing. I think people just need to practice their pitches as well, because we will eventually go back to face-to-face in some way, shape, or form, right?
I hope
maybe
so.
a couple months.
Oh boy. Online. You press the button, man. You press the button.
We could have that talk for a whole other thing.
It's
they're odd.
Online pitches. They're hard. They're hard for me, right? Because I generally try to stay positive about as many entryways into the industry as possible. I've been to I bore witness, let's say, to about 10 speed dating public pitch session events, of which I would say one was not a train wreck that just snuffed talent like a nightmare in a nightmare, right? Like was like
they feel like grinders, right? They feel
they're
like a
they're
They are.
grinders. They're grinders. They're not. I mean, sorry, but for the rant here, but I find they're not welcoming. They're all of the downsides of boot camp, but none of the upsides of actually getting decent feedback from it, because nobody's in a good mood. Nobody's openly receptive, and when they try to be, the merit that you are the merits of your pitch that you're getting graded on really don't translate. At least I find, right? They'll be like, yeah, that pitch sounds cool, right? Because all ideas sound cool to a degree, right?
Mm.
But you don't get a chance to dive in and give you meaningful feedback. But you get, of course, you get the thing that's hard for new designers, the sting of, oh, your idea sucks, or oh, I've seen this 100 times, or you are not a unique snowflake. I've seen this like. Whatever, and that crushes new people. Like
Reality check.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You also get the contact though, which is I think
Yeah.
ostensibly what people are there for in a
Mhm.
lot of ways.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And new designers need all of that crushing. I mean, here it goes again. But new designers do need that in order to grow. But they also need the constructive correction of how to pitch correctly, what they can do to change the look of the game or certain mechanics, or even just how they explain the game in the first place. Because I have been to a couple of these where I have been pitched to, and the majority of these new game designers don't know how to construct a proper pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done some panels on that where we've invited people to pitch to us, and then we kind of in front of an audience tell them how to reframe their pitch. And those are always great panels. I think people walk away with really valuable information, but they're not getting that at the speed dating.
They're not, and it's on that really quick. I thought one of the most, I'll be kind of a quick story, but when we did the pitcher game, like we did a Shark Tank panel essentially where it was come up, pitch your game and do that. It was a full room, and we talked for about 10 minutes and described, hey, here's how you should pitch your game. Here's the elevator, like what kind of points you should touch on. And then we're like, raise of hands, who brought a game to pitch? Only about 4 hands went up. And so then the first person, we gave them about 5-6 minutes, they went. And then after that, I'm like, hey, who is next? And all of a sudden about 10 more hands went up. And then the second person went. And after that, half the room had their hand up. And it was like, oh, it's that weird anxiety of who's going to go and do whatever. And that's kind of an interesting thing that you look at, because it's, well, how does that work? And I think especially right now, without having conventions, that door is open and closed in different ways, right? So to ship.
And after that panel, all of those game designers that we talked to like found me afterwards to like talk more.
Oh yeah, we had to go to the bar and hang out for a good like 15-30 minutes afterwards. So good.
Oh, I was just going to say Tabletop Network, who I've worked with for the past 2 years, and they try to present, professional development for game designers, whether they're brand new or experienced. And we did one of these like live game pitches, and I was really uncomfortable with it because, if you don't tell, it's like in school, if I don't tell students what I expect, how can I expect them to do it? So it was not, saying, that it was just too much of public embarrassment, I thought, and more entertainment than it was productive. So I basically said, if, one condition of me helping in the future would be that we present, how to pitch, just like Elisa's saying. And so that people actually have a fighting chance, because it's not fair to somebody have a really good idea, sort of collapse and become, and it wasn't as bad as I'm making it sound, but I want people to be successful, and I'm frustrated when I see that there's something that you could do to make them more successful. And so I'm just hoping that we'll be able to keep moving forward with that in the future.
And I don't think those events are bad. In fact, at Gen Con last year, I went to the double exposure room, and I went to one of them to be, pitched to, because I also act as an agent in the industry for game designers that don't know how to do it and don't have the connections that I have. And I actually saw a game that I thought was great on the spot, little micro game. And I did a handshake deal with the designers. I'm like, I can sell this game at this show. I guarantee it. And they were like, okay. And I sold the game that afternoon for them. And so it does work. It's just, it can be better. But through video, trying to do that, I think it's even harder.
Yeah. We just need more Elisas. We need more of you.
So to shift
I need more
from,
of you.
yeah, no joke. So to shift from game pitches and more into game design, everyone here has worked on different games that are, you know, part of immersive worlds or party games and different things that touch on different emotions and experiences. How do you, when designing games, like how do you focus on, we want to make an experience here, or this game's about the mechanics? What kind of things do you do to help bring that out in a game on the tabletop?
Good question. So
I'm not
today,
first.
I'll be first.
Yeah.
Today, actually, it's not a new model. It's not at all a new model. It's just I use different words to describe something while I was working with Jesse Wright on a project today. And we were just looking at, you know, we had a publisher say we'd like to expand our tabletop role-playing system into a board game, card game type thing to kind of diversify, but use the IP. And so we started off with getting all the thematic hits that they wanted to make sure that the game had in it. And then we sort of said, okay, what mechanics do we think fit that? And then the next step for me today was looking at the dynamics. So it was like thematics, mechanics, dynamics. And dynamics would be the interplay of the two things. You know, what are the mechanical things we think would be fun and cool to do as that kind of recursive loop that people enjoy, that fun thing, that engagement factor. And then how does that interplay with the concepts that thematically the publisher wanted? And so because I work heavily in IP design, where it's intellectual property and it's somebody else's baby, or, you know, an anime or a movie or whatever, there's always that thematic stuff already. So I start off with a little bit of a bonus in that regard. But if you're creating your own stuff, it's harder because you have to do it. You have to do all that stuff yourself. So I know Emerson, one of my favorite Emerson games is definitely Spectre Ops. How did you kind of resolve all the thematic stuff there? Was that all you first, or did the publisher Plaid Hat come up with that? How did that work?
Oh, so thank you for that question. That's a really good question. The Spectre Ops, the theme around it, my original theme for it was actually, it was originally going to be called Wanted. It was actually two policemen trying to chase down a suspect, and that it came from watching an episode of Cops. And in this particular episode, there was a suspect being chased by two policemen, and it's a very dramatic scene where, like, the cameraman is really trying to keep up with the two policemen that are chasing a suspect on foot, and it was through a suburban area. This suspect was incredibly limber. He was able to vault over fences, go through someone's front yard through their back door, run out the front door. So this was a really, really, like, engaging scene there. And I remember stopping whatever I was doing just to watch this and just imagining the adrenaline level that the police must have trying to chase down the suspect, and especially the suspect trying to get away, doing everything in his power to be able to elude the police. And so so in terms of the experience, like you were saying, that, you know, there were certain experiences that you wanted to capture. So that was the question. My design came from the question, how much of that experience can I capture? So what are the particular touchstones in order to be able to achieve that particular experience? And how close can I get to replicating it with gameplay mechanics? And I first started off with actually a video game model. So it was going to be actually a first-person video game with two people that are going to be playing the police, and they have access to a vehicle. And then it was a 2 versus 1 video game idea, and I started to create, like, the object models for that until a good friend of mine says, "Hey, you're really into board games. You know, why don't you try doing it in a board game?" And at first, my reaction was like, "No, I don't think that's I stopped and I went through, and like you said, you take the experience, you break it down into the particular touch points, and to see what mechanics can evoke some of those particular emotions. And you want to try to get the right set of mechanics and flavor, and that's what the layer of dynamics that you had referred to. So I think my process is incredibly similar to what you've outlined for yourself when it comes to, if you already have an experience in mind, trying to design around that particular experience. So what I had wasn't entirely like something I kind of came up with. I actually based it on something, an experience that I saw, and that kind of drew me in. It grabbed my attention, and I wanted to replicate that. So there's not a lot of things where I would say that I've done that is it's purely artistic. So most of the things, like, I've always based it on like a real world experience or some other emotion. So something that I wanted to simulate or replicate. This was sort of my starting points. So that was a really good question. Thank you.
Yeah, I was like, I love Spectre Ops, so that's a good stuff there. So Elisa,
Well,
how about you? Oh, sorry, Kathleen. Go ahead.
No, no. No, I was just gonna. Okay, well, I was gonna say that Peter Hayward, the designer and publisher for Jelly Bean Games, told me that Spectre Ops is one of his favorite games, and he's never felt as intensely engaged in any other game the way that he did with Spectre Ops. So there you go.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. No, I've upgraded myself. Emerson kind of not yelled at me, because I don't think Emerson yells at anybody, because I called myself an amateur plus designer, but I have upgraded myself now to hedge witch. I would definitely say my process is not formal. Usually is on something that makes me laugh, or something else. And so I'm like at the beginning stage of like really trying to push myself into other avenues that I haven't necessarily, designed in. Like, I'm playing around with a dice game because I've never made a dice game before. And so the one takeaway for me, especially for people who are just wanting to do this, is, staying open to feedback, because so much of what I do ends up being informed by the experiences that I get from my playtesters, and I'll follow that rabbit hole, as opposed to, here's the thing that I want, how can I get here? I'm much more willing to go somewhere else from where I originally intended a game to do. So I think the main thing for my advice would be, of anything, would be just, stay open to the path, stay open to the way that games develop and evolve, because I will always consider the most important ideas that I've ever gotten for a game are always the ones that other people pointed out something to me that just changed and shifted my game for the better, always and completely.
Lisa?
Well, I was going to say that I agree that experience is the main thing that I focus on. So, and I do a lot of different types of games in different parts of the marketplace, right? So I've done children's games, and I've done dice games, and I've done party games, and then I've done, super deep storytelling horror games, and then really immersive role-playing games, right? And so I do have a different approach to each type of game. When I'm designing and not focused on one particular design, when I'm starting to think about ideas, I do keep a game design journal, and it is a bullet journal style journal that I do. And so I have different sections. So when I think of a funny game title, I write it down, and I have a list of them, like just tons of them. And sometimes they will spur a theme, and sometimes they will spur a mechanic. And then I flip over to my themes or mechanic sections, and I write those down there, and I cross-reference and I color code everything. And it's like a serial killer's journal, basically, or like a board in journal form. And I put things together in that way. And and it may be my like ADD brain, but I work on many projects at the same time, and I'm constantly thinking about other games that I'm designing while I'm working and playtesting the game that I'm trying to focus on. And so that helps me keep all of those thoughts organized, because sometimes I'll be playtesting something and it doesn't work for that game, and it's a mechanic that I'm going to actually cut away, because I start throwing lots of different things at a game, and then I start, sculpting it to be the game that I want it to be an elegant game design, to be balanced. And sometimes something really cool has to be cut out, and I just move it back into my unused mechanics section of my journal, and I keep it there until it will fit something well, because I believe in designing in world, and whether it's for an IP that already exists, or whether it's in world for whatever game theme and experience I'm creating, I feel that it's really important for the experience of the game for people to feel like they are there, they are immersed in the story. And I think my role-playing game writing has really helped that part of my game design grow over the years. Storytelling is so important, even in party games. Like afterwards, you're going to tell the story of how you got to a certain scenario in that game, even if you're just answering trivia. And the story of the gameplay itself is what creates those epic moments that make people want to come back to the table over and over again. And so that's, I don't know, it's my crazy muddled brain process of how I go about designing games, but it works.
Actually, can I throw a question out there, since we're kind of on this topic of sort of like our design thought process? And this is a little bit for Sen, but it's really just a blanket question I have, in that when working with IPs, and I know Sen, you work with a lot of IPs, right? How difficult or easy is it to work with an IP, not the part with working with the IP license holders and trying to adhere to their vision for the IP, but more just to create the design around it. I've only worked with one IP, but it was one that I was incredibly attached to, and I already had like a strong vision for how I wanted the game from the fans' perspective. I knew what the type of game I wanted. But I know, since you work with a lot of IPs, do you find that it is easier or more difficult working with a particular IP, because it's already got its own sort of touchdowns, it's got its flavor and so forth, that you kind of have to work with?
I like it. And I think Eric and I have a colleague, Kevin Wilson, who would say, IP is not a stop sign, it's just a direction that you have to go in. And I often listen to fans. If you're ever on my Facebook, which you guys always are, and you see me ask a question about, hey, what is your experience like with, I don't know, Batman the Animated Series? You probably can guess that I'm going to work on a Batman game next, because I'm asking I want to poll fans to see what are the touchstones that they want to see in a game. I know what I want to see. I'm a fan of pretty much every IP I ever work on. I don't actually work on an IP that I'm not a fan of. Just because it wouldn't be doing it justice, right? Just like you're saying, like I know the IP you're talking about that you worked on, because it'd be like one of my favorites too. And I was so happy when you did it, because it's like Emerson is a bigger fan of that than I am, and I'm super happy to see what he comes up with. So yeah, I think Eric has done a lot of IP stuff too,
and Elisa,
and helped, and Elisa, right, and helped create whole worlds that are now IPs, right? So what's it like, Elisa, in RPGs? I know you did the Wildlings thing.
Wardlings, yeah.
Wardlings, that's it.
No, Wardlings is really interesting, because it is an IP. It's a WizKids Games miniatures line, and Wardlings just came out this month, actually, from Renegade Game Studios, and it was a really weird. I love design challenges. I always take projects that I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to do them, and I see it as a challenge on how to make better design. And I will take things that are scary and probably too scary for other people to take. And so I was given a bunch of miniatures that really all that there was to the world for Wardlings was the 3-line write-ups on the back of the packaging of the miniatures box, right? And so it would be something like, and I'm going to mess it up, this is not verbatim, but it would be like, boy fighter loves to go into battle with his battle dog and help people who are in need,
No, that's pretty close. That is really, really close.
And that's basically like all I got, aside from one conversation that I had with Brian from WizKids, who said, this is my idea for how the world works. We want it to be that only kids have magic, and I don't want them to die ever. And that was basically all I got. And so I had to then write an entire world and mechanic system based on a few waves of miniatures that had already been released and that conversation.
And then you had to fit it into 5e.
And it had to be 5e compatible, right? So,
wow.
So I did it. I wrote a whole history. There's an entire, history of this entire world. It's a brand new planet. It has a set of gods and a new spell mechanic, basically, and the whole new magic system, and a reason for why these children have magic and adults don't, and what the penalty is when a child would be put in a situation where they would be killed by an opponent, which the solution is that they age 1 year. And eventually they, instead of like normal, you have your normal death saves that you have in 5e, but if you fail that, the penalty is that you age a year, and as you age, you will eventually age out of being able to use your magic. And then you either retire your character, or you play as a character with no magic, or you bring that character over to Dungeons and Dragons or another 5e compatible system and play it there. And it creates a very interesting way of character creation from everybody that I've played with. They have this debate in their heads: how young do I start my character? Because I want to be able to have my character have as much of this magical life as possible, but I also need them to be old enough and big enough to be able to, you know, hold a longsword, right? And so there's all sorts of mechanics that get identified and created just from that thought process. And that's the really in the in-world thing. When you're making something up, you still have to keep it in world versus, you know, an IP that already exists where you have to make it feel very real because there are fans out there that are like diehard fans. And if you do anything wrong to their beloved fandom, then you get skewered on the internet, right? So
you can't avoid that.
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna get skewered anyway.
That's true, but I'm a fangirl of basically everything I work on too, because I agree with you, Zen. Like, I don't want to work on something that I don't know and love, because I want to do it justice, and I know how I would feel as one of these people, that I want to play something that feels like what I love, because that's all I want to do is be in that world, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good answer. So I was getting lost in that, which is super nice.
I will talk forever. So
no, it's all good. We have a wonderful panelist group here, so it's super good. So for the next question here, we've kind of talked about solo games a little bit and how there's online games, and where do you guys think that game design is headed as we go forward? We're seeing a lot more designers that are coming in, bringing in new ideas. We're seeing consumers ask for more miniatures here or more app integration with different things happening as well. And there's more big miniatures and there's more components and online features. Where does everyone think game design is headed as we go forward? Emerson?
Oh, well,
That way.
I think it's going, well, that way I'm going to label as the road to innovation, or trying to come up with something that is unique, that provides a unique experience, which is sort of like the MacGuffin that we're always after. We're always trying to create a design to evoke something new. And it's a very difficult thing, because we're always building on things that have worked, have been successful. And we keep learning from what are the things that players like, they enjoy, what are the psychological benefits they get from playing games, the satisfaction of creating a strategy and executing that strategy, feeling smart. So all these lessons that we're learning, it's helping us develop our designs to really hit those pleasure centers in the brain. But at the same time, we're kind of going down the tread path that we have been. And so trying to veer off of that path and trying to create something new is a real challenge. And you have to sort of break away a lot of the preconceptions that you've come up with, and also a lot of the things that you've learned as a game designer. You kind of have to put those to the side and try to go as tabula rasa as possible to try to come up with something that's different and unique. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is trying to go outside of board games and look at other mediums too. Like, for instance, I've gotten inspirations from movies, from TV shows, from books, and especially like video games. So I've been watching a lot of videos in terms of what are innovations in the video games. And I'll just throw out just one quick example. And it's a game called Snake Pass, which I've never heard of until I actually saw a video on game design. And it is a platformer where you don't jump. So you play the role of a snake, and the thought process is that in order for you to traverse the world, you have to sort of coil around things and work against gravity to make your way through it. And I've never seen a game with that type of a system before, where you need to understand that in order for you to get across this gap, you need to have enough gravity on one end of it and to coil yourself around another like pivot point to get to the other side. And it was just absolutely fascinating to watch it. And you get to actually see why snakes move the way they do is because, well, gravity and physics is what's causing them to move the way they do, the way they shimmy and the way they coil in order to make their way around the world. And a video game kind of captured that because they went outside the box and thought, okay, well, how do we make a platformer but take away one essential element of platforming, which is the jumping aspect? Can you make something like that? So it's those type of things. I like to learn that lesson of what things can we start to question? What are the things that we can really just throw wrenches in and see what comes out of it? And so those are some of the areas that I think that I'd like to see game design progress into so that we can see more innovation. And once we do have innovation, they start to become the staples. They start to become the genre definers to where we can then build on top of those. And then it's going to expand. It's going to bring the breadth of different types of experiences into our industry. So, and like Elisa, I can probably talk forever about this topic. So,
well, I'm curious about, you know, basically the volume of games and how that's going to impact design, because, you know, we've been talking for the last few years about this bubble, about how many games are coming out every year. And the unfortunate reality is that there are probably many companies that aren't going to survive. You know, if they're smaller, they may not survive past COVID. So if that's the case, then what will the market look like in terms of what's available and who's looking and who's publishing, and what are the types of games that, you know, they're going to want to have? You know, where is it going to be as important that you have so many different titles coming up just hoping something's a hit, or is there going to be a much more careful, you know, like cultivation of the specific titles that are made and produced? Are people going to stick with, are they going to go out on a limb with more innovative titles? Are they going to stick with, you know, adaptations of evergreen titles? And I think I'm just going to make things and see what happens, but I'm really interested to see, like, overall how the market is going to dictate what types of games. I mean, a good game should get made, right? And we want to see innovation, we want to see all these things, but I'm really curious to see how the actual impact on the market will shape what types of games we see, what types of designs are financially successful.
Yeah, there's actually a term for it, at least in the video game world. So just watching some GDC videos, there's actually a term called indie-pocalypse, which is sort of the, so we're in a state where supply is outpacing the demand. And so, and because of that, you know, you're slicing up the finite amount of influx of money into smaller and smaller chunks for everybody. And so what that's causing us, and it's both scary and I guess empowering in a way, is that it's going to be a much tougher arena for, you know, independent game makers, independent designers, smaller game companies, whether it be video games or board games or tabletop games, it's going to really push us to be innovative, to really come up with outstanding products. And I think by that nature, it's going to cause us to kind of evolve in a way. It's sort of the game designer's Darwinism in a way.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot in my Dream Crusher panels, and you know, we've all privately, publicly, I don't know, talked about the fact that, you know, obviously game production has been outpacing itself for years now. Every year, more and more titles are released. When I first started in the industry, you know, there were a couple hundred titles released a year, and that was a lot. And there were only, you know, a dozen game companies that anybody could ever name. And if they were producing 10 titles a year, that was like insane to think about. And now there are hundreds and hundreds of game companies producing thousands of titles per year. And there's only so much shelf space that a game store can have. There's only so much shelf space that a player can have. We were kind of chatting about that before this panel started. And we've been talking about the fact that eventually the bubble is going to pop. It has to. And hopefully all of the best game design floats to the top, and that's what stays in the marketplace, and that's how the game industry is going to move forward. And I don't know if this pandemic is a catalyst for that or not. We will see. But it definitely has, it definitely has slowed everything down, especially since, financially this has impacted all the way down the line, right? It's impacted game companies all the way down to us designers. I know that my royalty checks are probably not going to be very big, when they come in this year because, game stores were closed, and even when they were open, the warehouses were closed, so they couldn't get resupply, and manufacturers are waiting for, ships to be able to dock. Or if they were docked, they were like sitting there with no workers to be able to unload everything, and everything was delayed. Even Worthlings, the game that came out this month, was supposed to come out last month. I was surprised and very happy that it did come out this month at all, because we just don't know what's going on right now. And so when you're talking about a company having production revenue, revenue for production next year, that has been impacted already. So I don't know how across the board things are going to scale, but I know that I've heard from some companies I already work with that they are not going to be moving forward with their full production runs for next year. And they don't even know when they're going to be able to start ramping that up yet. And so that's a little frightening,
Mm-hmm.
So with that, to kind of on the tone, this is where the proctor would come in and go, you have 5 minutes left, 5 minutes left. So thank you so much for everybody being on. Really quick, we're going to go around and please say where we can find you online, and feel free to promote any games you're working on, and so on. Kathleen?
Oh, well, I present all of my game design teaching materials. If you're interested in teaching at the middle school, high school, or whatever level, at KathleenMercury.com. Everything is there available for free. So please use it, share it. It's yours. And then, and I can be found on Twitter at Mercury with 7 M's, and BGG is Funk Donut.
Sen?
Funk Donut?
Yeah, literally.
I really love donuts. It's like,
and funk. She loves funk.
I've danced on stage with George Clinton in Parliament Funkadelic. So yeah.
Oh, what? Oh, that's cool.
That's
Sit
awesome.
down, Sen.
Yeah, no,
Which you actually already are.
Yes, I already am. But I think I'm saying you're a pretty funky person.
Thank you.
Thank you. In a good way.
Hopefully.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Sen-Foong Lim, SenFoongLim. And every week on the Maple Syrup Show, which is on Facebook, just look up maple syrup. It's like the stuff you pour on your pancakes, except with meeples. And the latest project that I have coming out in July on Kickstarter would be Jiangshi, the Blood in the Banquet Hall, which is a tabletop RPG by myself and Banana Chan, where you play as family members running a Chinese restaurant by day and fighting vampires by night.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Lisa?
I'm Elisa. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Geeky Pinup, and my website is elisateague.com. What am I working on right now? I'm working on the World 5th edition role-playing book. My Worthlings, I have it right here. I can show it on camera. Ooh, pretty.
Ooh.
My Worthlings book came out this month from Renegade Game Studios. I'm constantly working on stuff for Dungeons & Dragons and Wizards of the Coast, and board games that are coming out. I cannot talk about I can't talk about any of them yet, but soon. Hopefully more conventions will be doing this online thing, and I will be able to do my Gen Con and PAX West or PAX Prime, whatever they call it, announcements when I'm allowed to do those. So, yeah.
Emerson?
Well, I guess the best place to reach me, although I've been kind of a hermit online, is on Twitter. I'm at Nazca Games. On Facebook, it's facebook.com/Nazca Games. So emails nazcagames@gmail.com. So I'm pretty boring. And I must say that I am incredibly flattered. Thank you, Ross, for having me on this. And I have to say that of I'm among probably some of the most esteemed designers in the industry right here on this panel. So thank you again.
Glad to have you. Eric?
Too damn humble. It's just a problem. I'm Eric. See, CMON.com is the website our publisher. I try not to pitch any specific game because I'm in development and I don't even know when our games are coming out anymore. But I mean, you probably know us, hopefully, if you're watching this. At the time you're watching this, there'll probably be an exciting new Kickstarter announced, but I can't tell you what it is. And we got, of course, a bunch of new stuff coming out next year. Personally, I'm on Twitter. I'm Eric Lang on Twitter. Well, I have to give fair warning. I talk equally about games and political and social activism. So if that's not your bag, no worries. I am public on Facebook, lately mostly politically and social activism, but I do talk about games, I promise. Just, this is not the time.
Great, thank you so much. So thank you all for being on. It was a great talk. I'm glad we could do this. And be sure to follow us for more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ross.
Thanks, Ross.
Thanks, Ross.